He was a cowboy, nephew to powerful cattle barons, foreman of the Embar Ranch, first sheriff in the Bighorn Basin, a husband and a father, and some would say the inspiration of a famous scene in the novel The Virginian, Horseman of the Plains. Sheriff Virgil Rice was a true pioneer of Hot Springs County, Wyoming. Pioneers of outlaw country, cowboys, lawmen, and outlaws, to the businessmen and women who all helped shape Thermopolis in Hot Springs County, Wyoming. Here are their stories. Smile when you call me that. Sheriff Virgil Rice.
There ain't no argument, Trampas. We're getting along just fine. Not that it's any of your business.
Who's talking to you?
I'm just telling you.
Yeah? Well, when I want to know anything from you, I'll let you know, you long-legged son of a...
Wait a minute. If you want to call me that, smile.
You're getting mighty touchy, ain't you?
About some things. You better be leaving, Trampas.
Sure. Come on, boys. I'll trim the hide off you in a game of stud.
Welcome to Pioneers of Outlaw Country, where we delve into Wyoming's vibrant history of renegades, lawmen, and the untamed spirit that shaped the Wild West. I am your host, Jackie Dorothy, and along with my co-host, Dean Keene, we invite you to step back into time to the Wyoming of 1895, where a fire crackles. Under the night stars, young cowboys prodded the flames, their voices alive with tales of adventure and laughter that pierced the darkness. Embraced by their circle, a tourist eagerly absorbed every story, swept up in the vivid narratives of the Wild West. Later, he meticulously inscribed these tales into his journal, capturing their spirit for posterity. In his journals, Owen Wister, often hailed as the father of Western romance, observed that cowboys would exchange coarse nicknames and hurl demeaning insults at each other, yet none would be offended.
Well, Steve, you honor your low-down son of a bull beaver. Well, you gal dang lazy soup-fed buzzard, you. What the sandhill you doing here? Oh, nothing special? Well, come on inside. I can listen to the lies you're going to tell me much better with a drink under my belt.
This tradition of good-natured ribbing and name-calling sparked Owen Wister's imagination when he heard a tale of a pivotal poker game. This true incident would become one of the defining moments in his novel, The Virginian. It marked a time when a simple insult nearly escalated to violence, challenging the notion that such jests were always taken lightly. Those that claimed that they were at this particular poker game said that it took place in Old Thermopolis. Sheriff Rice was studying his cards when a stranger grew impatient, and the young sheriff growled his response, the infamous, "Smile when you call me that." The scene Wister wrote based on this story captured the imagination of the world. I invite you to now sit back and listen to a bygone era as the campfire crackles and Owen Wister tells the story in his own words.
The Virginian by Owen Wister. 5 or 6 players sat over in the corner at a round table where counters were piled. Their eyes were closed upon their cards, and, well, one seemed to be dealing a card at a time to each, with pauses and betting in between. Steve was there, and the Virginian. The others were new faces. It was now the Virginian's turn to bet or lead the game, and he did not speak at once. Therefore, Trampas spoke. "Your bet, you son of a..." The Virginian's pistol came out, and his hand lay on the table, holding it unaimed. And with a voice as gentle as ever, the voice that sounded almost like a caress, but drawling a very more than usual, so that there was almost a space in between each word, he issued his orders to the man Trampas. "When you call me that, smile." And he looked at Trampas across the table, and yes, the voice was gentle, but in my ears it seemed as if somewhere the bell of death was ringing. Silence, like a stroke, fell on the large room. All men present, as if by some magnetic current, had become aware of this crisis. In my ignorance and the total stoppage of my thoughts, I stood stock still and noticed various people crouching or shifting their positions. "Sit quiet," said the dealer scornfully to the man near me. "Can't you see he didn't want to push trouble?" He was handing Trampas the choice to back down or draw still. Then, with equal suddenness and ease, the room came out of its strangeness. Voices and cards, the click of chips, the puff of tobacco, glasses lifted to drink. This level of smooth relaxation hinted no more plainly of what lay beneath than does the surface tell the depth of the sea. Trampas had made his choice, and that choice was not to draw still.
More than 3 decades after Owen Wister first encountered and elaborated upon that tale in his renowned 1903 novel, another teenager found inspiration in these narratives to journey to Wyoming. Tim McCoy, who would later become a beloved Hollywood star, ventured into the cowboy life, mingling with the now seasoned and weathered men who had originally sparked the imagination of his youth through their real-life adventures. Enthralled by being near these former boys of the Wild West, McCoy sought out their company and begged for their stories, much like Owen Wister had decades before him. In his biography, Tim McCoy Remembers the West, he wrote of these meetings and discovers the tie between the very people he was meeting to that of the author, Owen Wister, who had inspired Tim to come west. While working as a cowboy on the outlaw train of Irish Tom, McCoy prodded Frank James, a former member of the Hole in the Wall gang and a cousin to the infamous James brothers, to tell him about a bank robbery McCoy had heard rumors about.
Since the statute of limitations for whatever activities Frank James had been engaged in had not yet run its course, the only answer he would give to my carefully phrased questions about the event was a grunt. One evening, over coffee at Irish Tom's line shack, he mumbled, "If you want to know, ask Walt Putney, the son of a..." I knew Walt Putney, short, bone-legged cowboy and small-time homesteader. He had gray eyes, a black mustache flecked with gray, and a quick smile. In the Basin country, he passed for downright gregarious. I didn't know that he had, not too many years before, served a term in the Wyoming State Penitentiary. And while I no longer remember Whether he did his time for bank robbery or horse stealing, both were sidelines he had been known to have worked. Frank James, eh? Putney said after he and I dined alone one evening in Irish Tom's line shack. It was custom in those days that if anybody showed up at a line shack, cabin, or rancher's house, he was fed, given a place to sleep, and made to feel as comfortable as possible. Now, Walt had happened to come by late in the afternoon, and remembering Frank James's words, I invited him to spend the night, hoping we would get around to discussing the wild and lovely aspects of Trampas' history. Putney smiled, so he called me a son of a. You know, when I think about that jumpy fool, I can't help but recall a scene that took place in Trampas a few years back. The sheriff, Virgil Rice, was playing a game of poker with some of the boys in the saloon. He was studying his cards carefully, and a lot of time had passed when a newcomer snapped at him. Well, are you in or are you out, you son of a... Well, Rice gave him a mightily chilling stare and hissed, when you call me that again, partner, smile. Did you know that when that Eastern fella, Owen, now what was his name? Owen Wister, I volunteered. Yep, that's him, Owen Wister. When he was here, he heard that story, and they tell me he used it in some book he wrote. I had known Wister had visited the area while doing some research for the Virginian, and Walt Putney was just one of many cowhands who remembered the quiet man who, upon hearing a new expression or a colorful story, whipped out his notebook and started writing. Trampas, I've been told, was a real cowboy named Trampas. Shorty was a character who was still alive in my time, Shorty Holland, and, by common agreement among the cowboys, the Virginian was a composite.
Just who was this mysterious sheriff Virgil Rice, and that so many claim inspired this famous scene in the novel The Virginian? He was well known in the Bighorn Basin and, according to the newspaper of the day, well respected by the cowboys he rode with. Virgil Rice was a Missourian, born in August 1865 into an adventurous family the same year Civil War ended and slavery was abolished in Missouri. His parents, Ebenezer Virgil Rice and Aurelia Torrey, had moved to Missouri from Illinois and made sure their boys had an education. They raised their sons, John and Virgil, to be loyal and hard workers, traits that would serve Virgil well throughout his short life. By 1870, Aurelia took in her 17-year-old brother, Jay Torrey, after their parents had passed away. She embraced the role of both sister and mother with unwavering love and dedication. In Buffalo, Missouri, a town now lost to time, she poured her heart into raising her sons, creating a haven where family bonds flourished against the backdrop of America. It was a time of rebuilding, and after the Civil War, many Missourians and former soldiers were heading west to build new lives. One of these Civil War veterans was Robert Torrey, Aurelia and Jay's older brother. In May 1871, Captain Robert Augustus Torrey commanded Company A of the 13th U.S. Infantry, leading them north from Fort Bridger to Camp Brown, situated near the future town of Lander. His mission was to establish a permanent agency for the Eastern Shoshone and Bannock Indians, who had recently been allocated a reservation in the region. Renamed Fort Washakie in 1878, the camp honored Shoshone Chief Washakie, esteemed as a steadfast ally of the Army. Almost immediately after arriving in Wyoming, Robert Torrey had gone into the cattle business with the camp sutler, J.K. Moore. The partners had established their operation near Fort Bridger on Burnt Fork and were growing their herds on the plentiful grass. By 1880, a 14-year-old Virgil had followed both his Uncle Robert and Uncle Jay to Wyoming. The young teenager lived in Fort Washakie, working as a farmer in the household of Albert and Sarah Lane. His uncles continued to build the cattle business, and shortly after the death of both his parents, Virgil began working as a cowboy, learning the trade from the seat of a saddle. By 1881, J.K. Moore had sold out to Captain Torrey, who started moving herds to the remote Owl Creek region. He took with him the M-Bar brand and started increasing his holdings by buying out John Woodruff, the first white man to have been said to build a cabin in the remote and lawless area. All land was held by squatters' rights, and the brothers did not encourage any new homesteaders. Captain Torrey had built a cabin at the forks of Owl Creek, but moved his headquarters to the site of Woodruff's old cottonwood cabin. The valley was full of wildlife, pleasant meadows, and towering cottonwoods, with the meandering Owl Creek flowing from the mountains above. According to fellow soldier and rancher Colonel Sliney, other settlers were not welcomed into the valley. Every bit of vacant ground was considered an asset, and every new homesteader was a deterrent. The law, if it could be called that, was upheld by the Torrey brothers and their allies, since the county seat and deputies were in Green River, over 200 miles away by train and stage. The closest post office and supplies were at the Army post of Fort Washakie, 75 miles by horseback. In 1883, Sliney said there were two ranches on the Owl Creek, the M-Bar and the ranch owned by George H. Smith. There were also two vacant cabins on the creek, one at the forks of Owl Creek, later owned by John L. McCoy, and one at Kirby Meadows, near the mouth of Owl Creek, later owned by our very own Virgil Rice. Sometime before 1887, the 22-year-old Virgil had moved into the abandoned cabin while still working for his uncles on the M-Bar Ranch. He had to go to Fort Washakie for all his provisions and any social gatherings. During this time, either at Fort Washakie or at Owl Creek, he would have most likely met Owen Wister, the future father of Western romance, who had become friends with Virgil's Uncle Jay. The population was small during those first decades in Owl Creek, and future outlaws and lawmen mingled, working side by side to earn their living from the saddle. Virgil would have known and worked with many of the young cowboys in the region, including Butch Cassidy, Elsie Lay, Tom O'Day, Kid Curry, and the Sundance Kid. That winter of 1887, 8 men asked to pasture their horses on Virgil's field while they stayed at the bubbling hot springs a few miles away. These young men built and occupied a cabin in Smoky Row, which is now part of the Hot Springs State Park near Thermopolis. The men also put up one of the stone huts that served for bathhouses in those days and spent the winter soaking and most likely hiding out from the law. One of these men, Nate Champion, became a key figure in the Johnson County War just 5 years later in April of 1892. Another, Mike Brown, went on to become a prominent member of the Hole-in-the-Wall gang before becoming a distinguished businessman and founder of Thermopolis. The next year, as Virgil continued working cattle, he became a mill contractor for Owl Creek and was paid the princely sum of $875. 3 years passed, and then, in 1892, Jay took over Robert's interest in the cattle business and formed the M-Bar Land and Cattle Company with Virgil Rice and Jacob Price as shareholders. That winter, Virgil Rice left the ranch to pursue horse thieves. The Fremont Clipper ran the story with enthusiasm, proclaiming the heroism of Virgil and his fellow cowboys.
It seems that during last winter, the Embar Cattle Company thought that some of its horses had been stolen and driven out of the country. And thereupon, 3 of its men, Mr. Virgil R. Rice, Andrew J. Price, and Walter Putney, faced the hardships incident to a winter trip and went in pursuit. The trip was as difficult as could be imagined, and one of the hardships of which could only be appreciated by frontiersmen who had followed a trail through snow and mud. The trail of the horse thieves was snowed under no less than 3 times, but still, these men pushed on. When the trail had been snowed under the 3rd time, Virgil R. Rice left his comrades to look for it and went to Casper, took the railroad and went east beyond the line where the snow had fallen, obtained a horse, and rode out 50 miles with a view of heading out the thieves. Rice could not discover them or their trail, and returned and went to another point for the same purpose. In the meantime, he heard of the location of a band of horses which were being driven under suspicious circumstances, and hired a horse and went in pursuit. Upon arriving at the place where the horses were reported to be, Rice found that they were gone. He satisfied himself that they were the horses he was looking for. Unfortunately, it snowed on the nights of his arrival, so that the trail could not be followed. Rice ascertained, however, that the man with the horses had written a letter to the postmaster at Lusk, Wyoming. He went to Lusk immediately, was permitted to see the letter, and from it learned that Joe Nutcher was the writer and that he had ordered his mail sent to Alliance, Nebraska. Rice then went by train to Alliance. Upon the day of Rice's arrival, Nutcher came for his letter. Rice could have been arrested in town, but it was desirable to locate his horses and catch Nutcher in possession of them. Rice secured the assistance of the sheriff, and after Nutcher left town, he took his trail. Nutcher was located and arrested upon coming out of the cabin the next morning at daylight. He was at once taken to Alliance, and Rice brought him back and landed him in the Lander jail single-handedly. A plot was planned for Nutcher's rescue, but Rice stopped it by going on an unexpected trail and riding so fast that the would-be pursuers could not catch up. As it is well known, Nutcher had since been convicted and sent to the penitentiary for 4 years, and his partner, Nye, is serving a jail sentence.
During the roundup at the mouth of Owl Creek on July 25, 1893, Virgil, Andrew, and Walt were presented with silver saddles and equipment for their capture of Nutcher and the Montana Kid. Judge J. Torrey, as he was now known, presented the expensive gifts with an eloquent speech that the press recorded word for word. I am delighted to make you these presents upon behalf of the company, not only because I hope they will please you and add to your comfort, but because the occasion will call attention to the fact that the bona fide cowboy is a man of integrity, of ability, and is devoted to his employer's interest. There have been many lies circulated by ignorant and vicious people as the moral stamina of the cowboy, and I am glad, therefore, to be associated with an event which contradicts these slanders. Now, Judge J. Torrey's speech did go on, and on, and on, to the point where the reporters even commented on how long the speech was. But he was certainly delighted with the actions of all 3 of his employees, his nephew, his foreman, and his newly appointed assistant foreman. According to the Fremont Clipper, Virgil R. Rice responded modestly for his associates and himself and received the presents with evident delight. As for Joe Nutcher, the accused horse thief and former M-Bar cowboy, he claimed that he had bought the horses fairly from his brother Billy and was innocent of any crime. The jury, however, believed Joe to be in cahoots with Billy and sentenced him to 5 years in prison for buying the stolen horses. Virgil Rice's prospects continued to grow, and he filed another homestead claim, making a payment in full for the property. In August of 1893, Uncle Jay and his cowhands left the M-Bar with a herd of 600, described as fine a lot of beeves as ever left the basin. In December 1893, the Fremont Clipper reported, "The M-Bar Cattle Company, of which Judge J. L. Torrey is president, is one of the large ranches of Fremont County. This ranch is located on Owl Creek, and the company has on the range more than 12,000 cattle and pays into the county treasury between $3,000 and $4,000 annually as taxes. The officers of the company are as follows: J. L. Torrey, President; Jacob Price, Superintendent; Virgil R. Rice, Foreman of Cattle; D.J. Rice, Foreman of Ranches; Walter Putney, Assistant Foreman of Cattle." Ironically, Virgil's assistant foreman, Walter Putney, soon suffered the same fate as Joe Nutcher. After leaving the M-Bar Company and starting his own ranch, Walt was accused of stealing M-Bar cattle. Like Nutcher before him, Walt denied the charges, but was nevertheless jailed for the crime. Walt made a dramatic escape and then truly became an outlaw with a hole-in-the-wall gain, stealing cattle from the CY Ranch and joining in the Belle Fourche bank robbery. This is Jackie. Real quick, you can find out more about Walt Putney if you just go to Season 1 right here on Pioneers of Outlaw Country. Now back to the show. Throughout it all, Walt appeared to never feel resentment against his friend and fellow cowboy, Virgil Rice. In fact, in another ironic twist, Walt's younger brother, Veed, became Virgil's future brother-in-law. Virgil Rice once more made front page news. This time, it was with his marriage. He had been courting Miss Lizzie Lanigan, who lived over 80 miles away in Lander, and their union was seen as the social event of the year. The reporters gushed over the lace, bridal cake, and decorations, as well as the guests who were invited to this exclusive wedding. The Fremont Clipper reported, "Shortly after the dinner, the newly wedded pair left for the M-Bar Ranch on Owl Creek, where they will make their future home. Mr. and Mrs. Rice are well known in Lander and are respected and esteemed by the entire community. The bride has lived in Lander since her early childhood, and her winning disposition have endured her to all. Mr. Rice is a nephew of the Honorable J. L. Torrey and was born in Louisiana, Missouri. For the last 10 or 12 years, he has been connected with the M-Bar Cattle Company and has resided on Owl Creek. He is now a member of the company and range foreman for the same. This is a position which requires an intimate knowledge of the cow business and an especial tact in handling men. That Mr. Rice is possessed of these qualities is proven by the excellence of his work and by the feelings entertained toward him on the part of the men employed by him. It is safe to say that there is not in all the West another foreman for whom the boys have such an affection as the M-Bar men, one and all. This feeling is shared by all with whom Virgil comes in contact." The Clipper only voices the sentiment of every member of the community when it expresses a fervent hope for the happiness and good fortune of Mr. and Mrs. Rice. May no cloud of sorrow or care ever cast a shadow over the bright sunshine of their happiness. The following year, in 1895, Virgil was elected sheriff of the newly formed Big Horn County. He had earned a reputation throughout Wyoming as a well-regarded lawman and had acquired the nickname Bones sometime in the previous years. That same year, Lizzie and Virgil had their firstborn son, who they named after Uncle Jay. Life was looking promising for the young couple. By 1898, Virgil campaigned for a second term and easily won with a landslide of 200 votes. He was known throughout the state and his reputation continued to grow. His office was in Basin, at one of the oldest buildings in the fledgling town. Virgil and Lizzie welcomed another son into their family, Virgil Jr. In 1899, a third son, George, was born. Lizzie was expecting a fourth child when tragedy struck. It was 1901 and Virgil had been battling throat problems. He had gone to Casper for treatment, which ultimately failed. At the age of 35, on April 2nd, 1901, Sheriff Virgil Rice died from acute asthma. His widow gave birth to a daughter named Aurelia in honor of Virgil's mother. Lizzie tried to keep the family and homestead together, but by 1910, she was declared insane by the courts. Lizzie's sister Margaret took in the Rice children along with her husband, M-Bar Foreman, and Virgil's former partner, Jacob Price. The four children grew up, never knowing their father, but hearing the stories of his exploits and adventures in Hot Springs County. Stories that are now mostly forgotten and are buried with our first pioneers of Hot Springs County. Lizzie died in 1920 at St. Joseph Sanitarium in Iowa. Jay Torrey, pursuing his political ambitions, sold the M-Bar Ranch and pocketed all the proceeds. He had dissolved the M-Bar company years ago so that his foreman and caretaker for Virgil Rice's children, Jacob Price, was no longer a shareholder. Despite these travesties, the Rice children and their numerous cousins grew to have their own adventures in a new era of Wyoming. Wyoming's rich history often eludes written records, yet one novelist had ensured it doesn't fade into obscurity. Though the origins of the famous "Smile When You Call Me That" scene from Owen Wister's The Virginian may forever remain a mystery, perhaps born from Virgil Rice's poker game banter long ago. One thing is certain: Rice's legacy as a pioneer in Hot Springs County and a key figure in Wyoming's past should not be forgotten. It can continue to captivate and inspire a new generation. His story is a testament to the adventurous spirit and enduring legacy of the American West. Thank you for joining us as we travel back through Wyoming's past. I am your host, Jackie Dorothy, with my co-host, Dane King.
Thank you for listening to Pioneers of Outlaw Country. Be sure to subscribe, as you don't want to miss a single episode of this historic series. The stories of our pioneers are brought to you by Hot Springs County Pioneer Association. This program has been made possible through a grant from Wyoming Humanities. This was a production of Legend Rock Media.